Hey guys, how's it going? So, I wanted to make a little simulated universe guide where I talk about a bunch of little tips that I have or possible team comps or something like that, and I'll go through all the worlds as well. But first, let me talk about some of the important things in the top left where my camera happens to be. Let's first talk about the index here. So, I want to talk about Blessings, Curios, and Aeons right here. So when you first do World 2, I'm going to start with that one. You're going to have Preservation, Remembrance, Elation, and Hunt opened up. When you get to World 3, you're going to have Destruction, World 4, Nihility, and World 5, I believe you unlock Abundance, and then World 6, you don't actually unlock anything. But I'm going to be talking about these first. So Preservation. This is really good if you want to go super hard into buffing March or Japard, for instance. Especially with someone like Japard, he can completely pop off with something like the Preservation. You're able to just buff the shield by a ton. The shield does damage to enemies when they hit you or when you attack based off of the shield, and you can just be so defensive and strong. Something like Remembrance, this is insanely strong with somebody like March or Yanqing or also Japard. You have the ability to just freeze bosses. You can reduce their resistance. If these bosses have resistance to freeze, you can actually reduce their resistance to it and still freeze them. And you can even have things where every time they're unfrozen, they take a percentage of their health bar, insanely strong. Elation. This is good with somebody like March. It's good with Clara. It works with Himiko. It's good with Herda. Basically anything, also Yanqing, basically anything that is a counterattack counts as a follow-up attack, and also all the other follow-up attacks in the game. And overall, it's really powerful buffs. It's just not a ton of characters can use it overall. Same with Preservation over here. The Hunt, this is just general damage, just a lot of damage if you're using teams like Sela or Yanqing or something, just big single target damage with like, for instance, Dan. This is always easy to use, and almost anybody can utilize it. Just huge damage and rushing down the enemy, basically if you don't have any of these other special tricks. Destruction, this one generally deals with having taken a lot of damage on your team or being lower on health, and it's just also kind of like Hunt about big damage, but it's a little more conditional sometimes where maybe the lower health you're at you take damage, or how many times you've been hit, and it can be very strong as well. It depends how beefy your team is too. Sort of like a more bruiser team rather than a full DPS team like Hunt. Nihility, this one is all about debuffs. If you have a team using somebody like Sampo, he can completely go crazy with the amount of debuffs he's able to use and how powerful they become. Even stuff like I've heard Serval and Hook, just putting on their debuffs, you can chain it with this, and debuffs just become so powerful that nothing's really able to survive. Then we have something like the Abundance. This is a lot more powerful than it seems, just increasing your max health of your team by a bunch, making lots of heals happen, increasing your defense after you're healed, your damage after you're healed, doing more damage based off your total health or how much you've recently healed. Really great. Obviously, you want a healer on most teams, so it's just always going to be able to be used, and it's just insanely strong buffs a lot of the time. So that's kind of the basics of how all of these Aeons work, and depending on which one you use, you're really going to want to have a team that can support that. Like, you don't really want to go something like the Preservation or the Remembrance if you can't really utilize it that well in your team. Now, some of them are going to be useful even if you don't have a character that shields or you don't have a character that freezes. Like, it'll give you the ability to do that. But it's generally better to focus your team around being able to use one of these. That's why something like the Hunt is so universal, for instance, or possibly the Abundance. Now, let me talk about some of these blessings. So, obviously, the gold blessings are usually going to be better, but sometimes you can't really utilize that much. As you can look right here, these are all ones that I've also obtained, and I've gotten a lot of elation ones as I run a Clara team for most things. But as you go through, you'll always be, well, not always, but you'll usually be met with a portal that says Combat or Occurrence. And Combat will always be giving you one of these blessings. You know, you'll kill some enemies, you'll get the blessings. But if you go Occurrence, it's going to be complete RNG what you're getting. People ask which one's better. Well, sometimes Occurrence is better, sometimes Combat's better. You don't know. Sometimes you might go into Occurrence and it says, sorry, you didn't get anything, and you just leave. And sometimes you go to Occurrence and it says, hey, would you like every single blessing in the entire Preservation tree? And you're like, okay, yeah, I'll take every single one of these. So you never know what you're going to get. Occurrence can be more fun if you're really like gambling, and you can get some really cool things, like even like 3 pigs at the same time, which can be like a triple blessing thing, but you have to kill them in the time limit. So very interesting, but you're never really sure what you should get, so it's up to you. Let's talk about curios. So something important is when you go into one of these, you get 3 choices. You can get some extra of the like cosmic currency, you can choose a blessing, or you can choose a curio. So from my experience, it seems as though the curios are very limited. You can't just randomly get anything. And that's kind of how it worked in the beta. Instead, it seems to be a selection of a few. So most of them I'm not a huge fan of. There's something like this, the Shattered Star Babe. Or this one is actually okay, like you get more rewards when you smash this stuff, more of the currency, it can be alright. But the big one I think is Galactic Big Lotto, and this one is real risky. Sometimes you'll break something and you lose 99% of your current HP, you go to the next battle and you'll just die. Little tip by the way, if you choose the main character and have them in your party while you have Galactic Big Lotto, let's say you lose all of your health, you can swap the main character into your party, swap them from fire element to physical, and then spam their out of combat E ability, and actually heals your team by I think 15% each time. Just a little tip, can be useful, and then you can just swap them back. You can do that at any point you want, by the way. But overall, I think that choosing Curio doesn't feel amazing a lot of the time. Getting something like this just really isn't that great most of the time. So I don't recommend it too much unless you're gambling for the Galactic Big Lotto or sometimes the Omniscient Capsule. Usually I would go for the blessings instead. So let's talk a little bit about team comps, then I'll delve a little more into the worlds. So team comps, I would generally say the easiest way to make a team comp is you have a healer, some sort of support that's a kind of tanky support, someone like March or Japard or the fire version of the main character, someone defensive. And then you want a main DPS and then either a support for that main DPS or another DPS. So for instance, I run a Clara-centric team, so I'm running Clara, I'm running Tingyun, I run Natasha, and my last character is variable between March, fire main character, Japard. And I have Clara handle everything, and I just go Elation Tree. But instead of Tingyun, you could possibly use just another DPS, someone like Dan or Yanqing or Sela, somebody along those lines. But it's really important just to get a team comp that can survive everything, because a lot of people will get to the final boss and realize that they can't out DPS them and they might just get hit by an attack that instantly kills them. That definitely happens a lot as they get into World 6 or even into World 4 or 5. So keep in mind, usually it's better to be tanky, and getting a few blessings that might up the tankiness, like increasing your team's max health or how much healing they get or something along those lines can be really helpful as well. Or you can just unga bunga bum rush it, and if you're really confident and you're going for a certain type of blessing, you know what you're doing, you could just go like Bronya, Tingyun, Sela, and you always want some sort of heal, right? Natasha or Bailu, whoever you want. Now, let's talk about World 2 here. So, World 2 is where the first time that people might get stuck. You fight these 2 robots, one fat robot, one skinny robot, and really all it comes down to is you gotta take them out fast. You can only choose 4 blessing types in this one, I believe. I think it's Preservation, Elation, Hunt, and Remembrance. And so for most people, I think they're probably just gonna be going maximum into Hunt and just trying to burn it down. Because the other ones, people don't have the right team comp maybe, or they can't specifically go into certain stuff. I think if you're using March, you actually could go into Remembrance and kind of just freeze these down. They're both weak to freeze, which I think makes that very powerful. Using Yanqing or March, I think you can definitely go down that path. But a lot of other people are just going to be going down Hunt, and they're just going to be trying to burn it down. I was able to beat this, I believe, before I went into... I think when my characters were in the level 30s, I believe I did this one. It recommends team level 35, but you can usually do it when you're a little bit weaker. So I think you can do it around that level. People might run into trouble, but as long as you have a healer, I think you'll generally be okay as long as you can survive some of the big hits. Definitely the fatter robot is a lot scarier. Definitely have to kill the ads that he summons. But not too many tips to talk about there. But World 3 is where a lot of people get stuck. So this is the Japard fight, and it's a real pain for a lot of people. Physical, lightning, and imaginary. Not a lot of people are going to have imaginary, right? Unless you have Welt. So mostly physical lightning makes it a little bit harder. He hits like an absolute truck. You're going to have the destruction blessings unlocked at this point, I believe. And so the biggest thing with Japard is you need to be able to survive his big hit. He has this enormous damage hit, I think, where he jumps up and slams down with his shield. And I would recommend getting some sort of health increase or shield increase using people like March to defend the really squishy members of your team, or Japard, or the fire main character if you're at that point. I actually didn't do this when I was before an equilibrium level. I waited until I could get my character to level 40. You definitely have to get a little bit stronger, otherwise you're just going to get completely blown up, I feel. It's definitely a challenge. The destruction tree I think is pretty good, although a lot of people will probably rather go hunt overall. But definitely with Japard, be very careful about just getting one shot. For the squishy characters, you definitely have to make sure you have shields of some sort. And don't feel bad if you can't really do it that easily. You might need to level up a little bit of gear. It's better not to level up blue gear. If at all, please try and level up at least purple gear. You don't have to go super hard in it, but just increasing like a few levels on even stuff like the helm for extra health or the gloves for that flat attack boost can be pretty big and make something like this a lot easier. You don't have to have amazing gear, and once that gear, if it's bad rolls and stuff like that, you can eventually feed into something else, but you don't really have to go too hard in the gearing at this point in the game. So don't feel bad if you get stuck either, because a lot of people are having trouble there. And having a coherent team comp can definitely be useful, but you're still in the process of building it at that point. Oh, well, that came out of nowhere. Wow, thanks for the follow. Okay, let's talk about World 4. So, World 4 is Svarog. This is another one that people have to try a lot and have trouble with. Getting to Svarog can be kind of a pain because you have to fight stuff such as these. They can be annoying for some people's teams, but overall, usually people can reach Svarog. And so here's what Svarog does. He summons adds in each phase. The first one, he has like a few weak guys. The second one, he summons some of those guys with the blade arms, and they're a lot stronger. They actually do some decent DPS. It's good to try and clear out the adds before you really focus on him. But then in the final phase, he makes these gauntlet fist things, and they're able to trap your characters. They could trap your healer or your DPS and make the fight insanely hard. So you have to be really careful about that. What I recommend is keeping your little like path resonance ability, the one that you can activate anytime for when the hand appears. Like the moment he summons the hand, you can just activate it, depending on which one it is. Maybe it's one that does damage or something, like if it's the hunt. That's usually what I was using when I was fighting Svarog originally. How I fought Svarog is I actually just went with a team using Clara, and I didn't even have any weakness break or anything for him. I just had Clara face tank everything and kill the boss. And she was just doing so much damage, she just completely murdered it with the elation buffs. So I brute forced it, but a lot of people might not want to. You know, play to your strengths. He's weak to fire, lightning, wind. I think most people will be using at least one of those characters. You know, Dan for wind, or lightning with like Serval or Arlen. Fire with like Himiko or Hook or someone. Or even Asta, like a support, can weakness break him so quickly. But this is, I think, where you start needing to really tank up a little bit more if you don't have crazy DPS, because most people aren't really upgrading all their gear. They don't have like all this crit chance, crit damage. So I think it's easier to tank up than to just try and brute force it with big damage and low tankiness, because you might run into trouble if, let's say, your DPS gets taken away by one of the gauntlets or something along those lines. Definitely keep that in mind. It's always easier to tank up than to go full DPS. Just be careful. I've actually had it where I tanked it up too hard, and apparently elite enemies and bosses can enrage. And I didn't know that, but I think it takes like a million turns for that to happen. So tank up, but don't pick like literally 0 DPS. It's just that if you're choosing between something that's damage and like a lot of tankiness, the damage might be really alluring, but maybe getting something that increases your tankiness by a ton is more worthwhile. But Svarog, I would say, is a little more cut and dry, but World 5 I think is where things start to really ramp up for a lot of people. This is Kafka, and what makes her fight really hard is that she is constantly getting a stacking damage boost as she shocks you. Also, she's weak to imaginary. Not a lot of people have that, but the physical and wind makes it a little bit easier for people. The important thing with this world is you have to have a cleanse. Someone like Natasha, Bronya, or March is absolutely needed. If you don't run them, then you either do so much damage you instantly blow her up, or you just get lucky or something. Because she has an ability that mind controls your team. And if you don't cleanse it, she just takes over your characters, and she can spam it in her final phase as well. So that's really important. She actually hits quite hard as well, so you have to be very careful about that. At this point, you actually have the abundance blessings, and they can increase your healing, increase your defense, increase your tankiness, and I think that's very valuable. They also have a cleanse built in with their path resonance, I believe. so you could actually utilize that if you have nothing else, possibly. But either way, you need a nice mixture of damage and bulkiness and a cleanse. The cleanse is overall easy. Everyone has Natasha. You want to upgrade her trace. But as for the damage and tankiness, I would recommend getting a little bit of abundance, but you could still focus all in with something like Hunt or Nihility or whatever your team really utilizes for damage. And I think overall the important thing is just make sure you get a little bit of bulkiness at the start, just because sometimes she'll shoot her guns and then drop a bunch of grenades and it'll just combo and hit you so hard you won't be able to survive. Unless you have someone like Bailu, one of your squishier characters might just get absolute. By this point, I think it's very worthwhile having a decent amount of your items upgraded a bit. Like a lot of your purples might be upgraded on your main characters, probably want to upgrade the helm a bit so that you actually have a little bit of tankiness built in. I definitely think it's worthwhile gaining them some. You don't have to max everything, especially on the supports. You know, they don't really need their gloves maxed if they're not really a DPS, for instance. But definitely don't leave your characters just so squishy they're going to get blown up. It's not too bad to upgrade items yet, but don't farm too hard for items because it's still not really worthwhile until you get to account level 40 and can drop gold items. But another important thing about this is where gold items start to drop. You can actually get the gold set of this and this. Now, I think they're okay. This one is more okay, but I'm not the biggest fan of those sets, and I think World 6 is a little bit better to farm, but obviously it's a lot harder. But anyways, Kafka definitely is a bit harder of a fight, but I think that if you're utilizing characters like Dan or Su Shang, or I mean hell, even maybe the physical main character, although I don't as much recommend it, I think you'll be able to handle her as long as you get enough bulk to survive and you can use your Natasha ult or whatever right after you get nuked. And then you need to just be doing enough damage that you're out DPSing her damage stacking. Don't tank up too hard. Now for the final one, and this one is the hardest one for everyone. I've been able to beat this pretty consistently overall, just using my Clara team as her only DPS on my team. It works quite well. But Cocolia is pretty rough. Her first phase is very easy. People don't really have much trouble with that, but the second phase is where it starts to get hard. She starts to spam her ults, and she begins to get pushed up by Bronya, which she summons, and it starts to get really annoying. Now, her weaknesses, I would say, are pretty good. Quantum's not easy for some people if you don't have Seela. A lot of people don't use the Mahjong Girl, but the Fire and Lightning weaknesses, I would say a good amount of people have those, and they're really strong against her. Once she gets into the second phase, that's where it starts to become rough, because her ultimate hits incredibly hard. You can't out-tank that without either some good blessings or upgrading your gear a lot, or a mixture of the two. I really recommend trying to get some stuff like increased defense after a heal, or like big shield kind of stuff, like when you use Japard, or you're constantly using March on your squishiest characters, because since I'm using a Clara team, I'm relatively tanky, but I still find someone like Tingyun just instantly dies if I'm not careful. Classic, she always dies, by the way, for me. But I'm able to do this before Equilibrium 3, I think it is, at Equilibrium 2. Level 50 you can definitely do this, but it's just not easy. I had to upgrade most of my gear on my characters. My Clara has most of her gear maxed out. My Natasha doesn't really have much at all. I've tried Japard and the main character and March and been able to successfully win with all three of them. And I had to upgrade some defense gear for them to make their shields a little more viable. And overall, it's kind of a rough fight. You really have to be careful of that ultimate. I've tried two different strategies. One was the tank up strat, which is how I successfully won the first time. I really went tanky, just slow, couldn't really die to her ultimate, was able to outlast and survive. And then the next time I cleared, I just went full balls to the wall, maximum damage. My Clara was doing 30% of her health bar every time she countered. Completely just crushed her, it wasn't even close. Pingyun died, don't even care, Clara is just blowing her up. And that actually was really easy too, so I think both strategies work, but it's much harder to just burn down Cocolia unless you've upgraded all of your gear, so definitely make sure of that. And Cocolia, I believe, is completely immune to freeze, but I'm not 100% sure. But I think if you go something like Remembrance, you can reduce her ice res enough that you're actually still able to freeze her, which is kind of crazy. I believe that's how it works. Characters such as Japard are very good here. You definitely want some cleanses because she's constantly freezing your team, or you get some like effect resistance from some of the blessings. Characters like Asta are just absolutely great here. Just any sort of big burn kind of stuff to be able to break her toughness bar to interrupt her ult is insanely useful. But if you just brute force it like I do, and you just ignore their toughness bar and say, I'll get the good blessings, let's go in, then that works totally fine too. But there's no rush to exactly beat this one, but I will say once you beat it, you can start farming. This one I think is nice on those defense scaling characters, such as, you know, the main character or Japard or March. And this one is really good on Clara, but also possibly good on some other characters, at least at the moment as a filler set, because it gives crit and it gives some ult damage. Hey, a lot of DPS can utilize that, so that's nice. So I think if possible, it's definitely recommended for you to do it. Also keep in mind, as your equilibrium level goes up, you actually do get more in the shop as well. Start to get these Immersifiers, you get 2 each, you get a little bit more Stellar Jade, a really little bit. Get some more credits, get some Lost Crystals. So yeah, you get better rewards, and it's definitely worthwhile doing it. And even if you fail these, you can always upgrade the ability tree. The ability tree starts to get pretty crazy as you go. You start getting really useful stuff, like being able to reset blessings if you don't like what you get and re-roll them. And you start getting these other path resonance upgrades and stuff, and you start to get more and more powerful. So even if you're failing, you are getting stronger. You get some free stats and stuff like that too. So it's not all bad, and you're able to contribute more towards this weekly. But anyways, those are overall my tips. The last thing that I would say is it is very important just to get a decent team comp, characters that can actually synergize realistically together. So I built a whole team around Clara. Maybe you have a Sela team and you want to go like Bronya with her and Natasha, and then maybe either a defensive character, or you just go Ting Yun and you just go full damage. Maybe you go for a team that's using someone like Bookmain DPS or something along those lines. You use Welt because he can just kind of fit into a lot of different teams, and then you go like Natasha and somebody else. Like, there's a lot of ways to approach this, but it definitely matters that you have a team with a plan in mind of like, oh, I think I want to go down this remembrance line and really focus on this, because it makes it so much easier than just kind of throwing a team together of like, hey, I picked these 2 DPS and this DPS support and this healer, and then you just instantly get blown up by Kokole and you're like, oh, okay, what am I supposed to do? But anyways, that's overall everything I want to talk about. I hope that this helped. If you liked the video, don't forget to leave a like or subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you next time.